Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another Geo-Institute live stream. You have either come here intentionally or stumbled upon the Geo-Institute Summer of Live. Yes, it continues. It is merely August. You have another month or so to go before we stop using that tagline and you stop seeing that awesome psychedelic music every time we make a post. My name is Brad Keeler. I'm the Geo-Institute Director, and we are thrilled to have you with us for another episode of GeoStrata Extra. We are entering our 6th year of doing this. We're still on season 6, but guys, thank you for watching and keeping this thing going. It's your opportunity, chance to go behind the magazine. If you don't know anything about Geo-Institute, let's start there. After you watch this today, you can head over to geo-institute.org, and there you will find out all kinds of things about our institute, including we are a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and that we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. And if you like what you see today, and I always feel very strongly that you will, you should click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Now, again, GeoStrata Extra. If you do not read the magazine, this is easily achieved. All you have to do is take your favorite internet device and head over to readgeo.com. And when you do that, you will be faced with this, the cover of our most recent issue. And this is the one we're going to talk about today. It is the August-September issue on Earth-filled dams, and there's all kinds of great stuff in here, including Michael Bennett's latest Our Roots piece, a story by Tim Stark about living in Ralph Peck's house in Urbana, or maybe Champaign, I hope I didn't screw that up, Illinois, and of course, the article that we are going to talk about today. And so, now we go to our feature presentation. Astute Editor Mike McGuire from Lafayette College is here to do our interview today of Georgette Hlepas from the United States Army Corps of Engineers. We are thrilled to have you guys with us here today, and this is going to be a fantastic interview. So, Mike, take it over.
Thank you so much, Brad. It's always great to be introduced by the great Brad Keeler. I am, as Brad said, I'm Mike McGuire. I'm coming to you from Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. And I've been an editor for GeoStrata since 2014. And I'm so happy today to be joined by Georgette Hlepas from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And we're going to have a great chat this afternoon about her article that appears in the current issue of GeoStrata magazine on the long-term performance monitoring of dams. If you haven't already read the article, as soon as this extra is done, you should go check it out. It is a great article, a great read. I have a very impressive bio for Georgette that I'm going to read for the benefit of the audience, just so those of you who do not know Georgette have a little bit of context for her background and achievements. So Dr. Hlepas is the principal geotechnical engineer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and leads the Geotechnical Geology and Materials Community of Practice. She has 19 years of experience in geotechnical investigation, design, evaluation, and construction oversight of civil works projects such as dams, levees, and confined disposal facilities. She has a PhD in civil and materials engineering from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and holds master's degrees in civil engineering from Columbia University in New York and geological engineering from Missouri Science and Technology. And we're not done yet. Dr. Hlepas has focused much of her career on advancing the state of practice in project performance monitoring, has taught multiple courses and workshops, and has authored numerous papers related to geotechnical engineering. She is also on the board of directors for the U.S. Society of Dams, and is the co-chair for the Technical Committee on Surveillance for the International Commission on Large Dams. She lives in Chicago, Illinois, and holds a professional engineering license in her home state. Welcome, Georgette Hlepas.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm pretty honored to be here and have this discussion today.
Great. So the way this is going to go, I've shared 11 prepared questions about the article, and we'll use those as a sort of scaffolding for our conversation today. We don't need to get to all of them, and if we get on an interesting thread, we're going to keep tugging on that thread. Those of you in the audience, there is a chat feature in the YouTube live stream. If you have some questions, a good question, go ahead and put that question into the chat. Brad Keeler is monitoring that chat, and as time allows, we will try to get to those questions. So, are you ready?
I think so.
All right, here we go. So, the first question has to just do with how you found yourself focusing a lot of your energy in your career so far on performance monitoring of dams. How did you first get exposed to this field, and how did you, decide that this was the path for you?
So I think it was a series of accidents. I definitely didn't graduate school thinking, hey, I'm going to get involved in instrumentation and monitoring. I'm going to get involved in dams. That really wasn't the case. I had a great education, learned a lot of basic fundamentals, but it wasn't until I started working that I actually learned about instrumentation. My first experience was as an intern. I worked for the Engineering Research and Development Center for the Corps of Engineers, and they were using sensors to monitor pore pressures in little model dams and putting explosives on top of them and putting them in a centrifuge to see what the response would be. I was like, okay, I know about piezometric pressure. This is kind of cool. I didn't realize you can use these sensors and these models for research like this. Right out of school, first thing I got exposed to. Then I went to Chicago District, and almost immediately I was on a project that used instrumentation. It was McCook Reservoir. And there I learned more about a more variety of instruments, looking at time domain reflectometers, so TDR cables. I hadn't heard of those before. I've heard of the glenometers, but I hadn't actually held one in my hand. So this was an opportunity to like be in the field and actually see instruments and feel them and get them installed. And I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. I get the application. But really what kind of kicked it off is I got involved in Wolf Creek Dam. And that dam was under construction. They were modifying it because they had a lot of seepage issues. And they had all the historical information showing the seepage problems. And during construction, they were monitoring the instruments to say, okay, well, how is construction going? And then post-construction, did we meet our intent? Did we cut off that seepage? And I was like, well, that's really cool. Like this is actually the data evaluation part. And I got excited about it. And I did a lot of work and I wrote some papers to prove that with instrumentation, this project is safe. And I think my mentors and my supervisors kind of noticed I got geeky about instrumentation and data and evaluating it. So they started pinging me and like, hey, there's this other project over here and this other project over there. So I think it was just people noticing that, oh, she's got an interest in this and opening the doors in those projects and letting me have at it. And I got to say, a lot of it is I don't get bored. Every project is different. Every project is unique. And it's like a puzzle or a forensic investigation of, okay, we have this instrument, it's monitoring this data is strange. What does it mean? How's it related to the project performance? Let's better understand what's happening. And so because I never get bored, I think I fell into it and continue to enjoy it and continue to accept projects that have instrumentation and keep learning on it.
That's really cool. So I like this idea of never getting bored. So I teach undergraduates in civil engineering, and one of the things that we talk about is that your education's never finished, right? And it seems particularly true in the case of performance monitoring of dams. You have evolving technology, evolving interpretation of data. You have new ways of thinking of how to use that data for decision making. So what techniques have you developed? What methods do you use to kind of stay on top of your field and kind of pursue that lifelong learning?
Yeah, I think it's a few things, right? It's always accepting new projects and going to the sites and talking to the people and seeing what are they using there, what's happening there. That's one side of it. And you can get that with on-the-job training. But I think a lot of it is challenging yourself outside on the job, right? Going ahead and joining committees for professional organizations. So I think for my case at least, I got involved with the U.S. Society of Dams, and they have the Monitoring Dams and Their Foundations Committee. I entered into a meeting one day. They're open, anybody can join. And I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And not only is it cool, they're doing things with instrumentation I hadn't heard of before. And then, I was voluntold that, hey, you should probably work on this document with them. And honestly, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because once I started working on a document and had to write down what I knew, I realized what I didn't know. Same thing happened at the Corps of Engineers. We're working on an engineering manual. And I got involved in that manual early in my career before I knew as much as I know now. And that really got me to learn so much more about having to explain what I know on paper. So between, attending these committee meetings and working on workshops with them, or even teaching, anytime you teach something, you really have to understand it, and putting together that presentation, it opens your mind to, okay, what you don't know, and researching what's out there. And a lot of times these workshops, they have co-instructors or co-authors. You learn a lot from those other people and what they're working on, and it just constantly opening the door of what's happening. And just working in general, you're always looking for, okay, is this the right way to do something? Is there something else? And being open to the idea of, hey, this project did something different. Let's look at that application. Can we use that here? I think it's just always having an open mind, being involved, talking to people, and honestly, those professional organizations, that had a big role in it. So I mentioned USSD. That's a national member for the International Commission on Large Dams. That's an international platform where you get to see what people are doing in other countries. And a lot of times it's a little different than what we're doing. They're using different tools or using them in different ways. They may be more advanced in how they're visualizing things, or they may have plotting techniques you didn't consider on your project. So I think getting out there, getting out of your bubble, getting involved, and not just getting involved, but being active, right? Being an author, being a presenter, on a YouTube channel, teaching, all these things will force you just naturally to keep yourself learning and keep yourself engaged in what's new, what's out there, and what's happening.
Yeah, that's cool. So let's take InSAR as an example. So this is a newish technology, right? And this is something that you've obviously had to come up to speed on. So I imagine there are some people in the audience right now, or maybe some GeoStrata readers that have some familiarity with InSAR, but I bet many don't. And so what do you think the kind of typical GeoStrata reader needs to know about InSAR in terms of the technology itself, what you can do with the data that's generated, and maybe some of the constraints like cost, et cetera?
Yeah, no, that's a great example, because it's relatively recent for, let's say, dam monitoring or infrastructure monitoring. And that's something I got exposed to at these conferences. People were talking about InSAR and how great InSAR is. And then, of course, we have folks saying, hey, we have these, we're an InSAR supplier. Here's what we can do for you. And of course, I'm like, wow, this sounds really great. I like to do my research, and I would tell anybody on this call, do your research, understand the technology before you use it. And that's true for anything. And actually, I wrote an article on InSAR and some things to consider for InSAR. I think the bottom line on it is a proven technology. It's been around since like the 1990s. We've only more recently been applying it to small scale infrastructure. And I think what people don't recognize is that its original purpose was for gross large scale movement, like glaciers moving and landslides. And what we have in our projects, especially dams, it's typically smaller. And so when you're looking at satellites, there's a variety of satellites that are out there, and each one had its original mission, original intended purpose. So the resolution or the how fine of a data set you get, right, it's going to vary, right? And so if you're looking for something on a dam that's maybe 2 foot in diameter, a small depression feature, or a sinkhole, you're not going to find that with these satellites that have 20 meter resolution, or even 3 meter resolution, because consider that like a pixel size, if you will. It averages that movement out, so it kind of disappears. So there's a lot of folks thinking, oh, this is the end all be all. I have a satellite out there, it's routinely looking at my site, I can get all the data. But if it's small movement, like small scale, like, okay, it's got millimeter, centimeter accuracy and amount of movement, true, but how big is it, right? How big is what you're looking for? If you're looking for something big, yeah, you might be able to see it. So looking at what satellites out there, what is the resolution of those satellites and making sure it's appropriate. Looking at, okay, can these satellites see through vegetation? Like a lot of our dams have grass cover all over them. The satellites that have C-band and X-band, they can't really see through vegetation, but they work really well when you have riprap. Riprap, it has a lot of angular features. It provides a nice reflective surface. You can really see what's happening. But again, are you looking for something that's a massive depression feature that's 20 meters big, or are you looking for something small? If it's something small, you might not see it. Other discussions were, well, hey, it might be really good for looking at upstream or downstream of our dams and looking for landslide potential. And again, yeah, that is a good use. But if there's vegetation, you might need to look at an L-band satellite instead of an X or C-band satellite. And we had one project where we're looking at using InSAR for downstream landslide potential. And I asked the question, well, how quickly is this thing going to occur? Like, oh man, it's going to be, if it happens, it's going to be rapid. I was like, well, the collection on this thing is every 14 days. So if it's not a creeping slow movement, you might miss it. And they're like, oh yeah, we didn't realize that. And I said, yes, it might not be the right tool. The other thing with InSAR that a lot of people forget is they're always thinking about the satellites. You could have terrestrial SAR where you set up a piece of equipment, it's monitoring exactly the location you want, you get pretty high resolution, and you can set a higher frequency, and that works as well too. But it comes down to, knowing what the satellites are for, knowing the resolution, knowing the data frequency, knowing what surface cover you're monitoring, and then understanding that when you get SAR data and you stack it to make InSAR images, you can buy the data, that's one cost. But then you have to process the data, which is another cost, and then you can create a visual, but then someone has to interpret that data. So there's really three costs involved with that, and not all the time are people putting those three costs together. And not all suppliers or firms that are out there offering InSAR services do all three of those. So that's something to be aware of as well is, okay, are you just getting the data? Are you getting plots of the data? Or are you getting someone who can interpret that data? And do they have the background in the infrastructure you're monitoring, right? You might hire someone who knows a whole lot about earthquake monitoring or landslide movement, but they don't really know a lot about dams and how dams fail and what to look for, what's normal and what isn't normal in the behavior of the project. So that'll make it difficult to interpret if they don't have that background. Yeah. So hopefully that kind of helped.
No, that was really great. That was right on. So kind of keep going on this, the idea that, we all kind of as engineers have our kind of personal thresholds for kind of being willing to try new things. And our organizations that we're a part of also have certain either inertia or kind of energy to try new things. So as somebody who is at the table making these decisions about deciding what a monitoring program looks like, do you find yourself advocating more for newer school technologies like InSAR that may have advantages like being less labor intensive, but you might be the only person in that room that knows anything about it? Or do you have instances where you're advocating for the more traditional old school techniques like optical surveying that maybe are more labor intensive, but are like the right tool for that job?
Yeah, so I think I found myself on both ends, right? I've definitely been in the room where someone's coming into the room and said, hey, I want to try, let's say, fiber optic cables, or I want to try InSAR. I've seen a case study, or I've talked to someone who showed me a presentation, and it sounds fantastic. I actually just recently came off a call. We're talking about this new geophysics tools. And then the question is, well, how new is it? I mean, is it still in the research and development phase? Because we've had that happen of like, hey, we have this tool, we think it'll work. We want to try it out on your project. And that's great. But if there is a real concern on the project and there's a high risk associated with the project, you want something that's reliable and been tried and true. So it's looking at, okay, has this technology been used for this application? Is it appropriate? And if so, yeah, let's go with it. But I've had the case where I've argued, well, maybe we shouldn't use this new technology because of the high risk. You can flip it and say, hey, yeah, let's go ahead and use this technology because what we currently have is not enough. And we've seen that with surface monitoring points, right? You going out with a survey, they're spaced so far apart. We know that there's something happening, let's say, in the project. We don't quite understand it. The density you can get with surface monitoring is just not there. So maybe we look at InSAR, and InSAR is not the solution because of the frequency or the resolution, but maybe we look at LiDAR. Maybe we fly LiDAR. And I've had some teams say back to me like, well, we haven't done that before. How do we know it works? And it's coming to the table and showing them, no, it has worked. And here are similar case studies that's proven to have worked. So I think being prepared to show examples and the benefit of the new technology in certain cases, but then also being able to say, well, that is great, but this is what's different about your project and why it's not appropriate on this project. So it comes down to being sure you yourself understand the different tools that are out there, and then being able to communicate why one is better than the other. But I've definitely been on both sides of that situation. I'm not keen to always do the new stuff or always do the old stuff. I'm definitely open-minded. And what is it we're trying to answer? What's the question we're trying to answer? What kind of data do we need? How frequently do you need that data? How accurate does it need to be? How sure do we need to be of the results? What's the accuracy, the precision? All that needs to be considered before selecting that tool. And if you lay that out and explain to folks, this is why this tool is superior to the other one, let's move out for it. A lot of times, I'm in discussions too about cost, and everything is about cost. It's like, well, this is too expensive. Let's just do this. It's you got to take cost off the table and say, what do you really need? Especially if it's a project where it's important. If you have a potential failure mode, you have, high consequences downstream. Like, what's the cost of missing this? What's the cost of something really being there and we're using the wrong tool and we can't detect it? Bring that to the discussion, because then it's like, okay, let's really get the right thing we need to prove there isn't a problem or prove there is a problem. And if there is one, all right, let's work to the solution on how to fix that problem.
Yeah, that's a really great way to look at it. Both being open to new technologies, but not just pushing away the tried and true ones just because they're older. So speaking of older, you mentioned in your article that a lot of our dam infrastructure is at least 50 years old, right? So we have, facilities that have been in service for a while. A majority of these services have pretty tight inspection intervals. So there's, a lot of accumulated information. And so particularly the operators, inspectors tend to know where the areas of concern are. But there may be some unknown areas of concern, some things that kind of arise that may pop up if there's some change in conditions. So how do you tailor designing a monitoring program that both targets those known areas of concern, but also has some eyes on the potential for new areas of concern to arise?
Yeah, so I think we've got to look at like the history of risk assessments and monitoring and how that's changed over time. I think originally, there was this thought that, hey, let's put a grid pattern in and do general health monitoring, make sure everything's okay. And that's how instruments were installed. So you visit a lot of projects and you see, upstream to downstream instruments spaced 200 feet apart or whatnot, typically piezometers, typically surface monitoring points. And you use the observational method and you say, oh, okay, I see something here. Let me install additional instruments in these locations. So then you end up with all these projects that have grid pattern instruments and then targeted clusters of instruments in other locations. That was one way to do it. But what we've started doing since I want to say 2010, maybe a little earlier than that, is risk assessments. And that is really what is critical to identify what you may be missing, because that risk assessment is going to bring a team together of all the disciplines. You got your hydraulics, hydrology, geotech, structural, operations personnel, construction personnel. You're going to go and you're going to review all the information about that project. And you say, okay, when was this constructed? What were the design features in this? Do they include the design features that we would put in this project today? In it, or is this an older construction methodology that doesn't have certain features that would protect from potential failure modes? And then you walk through the process of, okay, how could this project potentially fail? And then you're going to look at, okay, the geology, you're going to look at the construction, you're going to look at, okay, what existing instruments do I have to help inform my understanding of potential failure modes on this project? In the end, you're going to end up understanding what areas are higher risk that you may not have considered before. And what you're going to identify is, well, you may have some instrumentation, but you don't have it in the areas that this risk assessment is showing you have a problem. And I actually was recently on a project where all the attention was on the right abutment. Lots of piezometers, they have surface monitoring points there, lots of visual monitoring, and we have a good understanding what's here. And like, yeah, is there a potential for failure? Yes. Are we monitoring it? Yes. Okay. But the risk assessment showed that on the other abutment, there was a similar issue and it wasn't being as closely monitored. And so the question was, well, is this going to be detected as we currently have it? It's like, well, no, we have one piezometer and it's not monitoring the zone that we've now identified from the new geology information. We got a potential issue. So let's modify our program to target that. So I think looking at a risk assessment on every one of the project is key, and comparing that risk assessment of where we have concerns versus where we are currently monitoring and say, do those match up? Is the instrumentation that's there informing us of these potential concerns? And then hopefully over time, they're going to say, no, you know what, everything's good. This isn't a concern. We can reduce our monitoring frequency. Or it might highlight, yeah, no, there is really something here. We are concerned, to the level that we might start lowering the reservoir level. We might start designing a fix. We might start increasing monitoring frequency to make sure nothing bad happens. So I think the historical information is good. It's useful in a lot of cases, but sometimes we have the instruments placed there just because it was a grid pattern and they're not in the right place. And you have to make the decision, do we keep the instrument? And that stirs up a whole lot of discussion because it is expensive to install instruments, especially in kilometers, piezometers where there's drilling involved. But you may have instruments that are not really providing valuable information. So there's a whole process you need to go through to see, okay, is this existing instrument still useful? Is it still good data? Is it functioning? And in fact, a lot of people are afraid to abandon instruments. They're like, oh, well, can we use it for general health monitoring? And in some cases you can, but then maybe reduce the monitoring frequency and not consider it a critical instrument and focus your attention on the critical instruments that are actually monitoring potential failure modes.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, yeah, I mean, you even spend some time in the article talking specifically about historical instruments and kind of how they contribute to addressing current needs of the dam. I also was really struck by, in your article, the discussion about levels of concern that trigger particular actions. And so I wanted to kind of unpack that a bit. And maybe we'll just take, for example, piezometer data. So, can you expand on what types of actions may be triggered as the piezometer data indicates an increasing level of concern?
Yeah. So thresholds and action levels. So basically what I was trying to get at, or I'm hoping people take away, is you can't just install an instrument and just watch it, right? You install that instrument to monitor something. And that something is hopefully, telling you information about the performance of the project or potential failure mode. So you have to establish some sort of thresholds of, hey, I should pay attention, or, hey, something's really happening here. I'm pretty concerned. And then there's more of an emergency state. You shouldn't be establishing just the emergency state that, hey, if this thing jumps 4 feet or just skyrockets, then we're going to do something. It should start at a lower threshold level and increase over time. So a lower level may be, okay, I have a funny reading. My initial action should be, well, reread that instrument. Is that funny reading or high reading or slight trend, subtle trend real? And then you might say, okay, well, let's say you say it is real. Then the next step would be, all right, well, let me look at other neighboring instruments, reflect on what potential failure mode is that instrument monitoring, and what is my level of concern with that. And so there's a lot of engineering judgment in what the actions should be. And there should be a document that kind of lays out what are these different thresholds and what should these low level, medium level, and high level actions be. But I caveat that with, you can't really document everything. You can't have a plan for everything. There may be a piezometer response that you just don't understand. And And I think it gets down to, you can have a plan, you can have your threshold, you can have your action, which is check the other instruments, increase monitoring frequency, but you got to communicate. You got to communicate what's happening, and you have to let the dam safety project managers, dam safety officer know that, hey, we've checked this reading. We think it's real. We've checked these other instruments around there. They're showing also something going on. We need to have a focused attention on this to be sure there's not a developing failure mode in process. And if there is, we need to act, and we need to take action on there. And I think one of the comments I had in the paper is, you can't just sit back and monitor and watch this thing rise without a threshold for which you're going to actually take action to stop and remediate, or do an interim risk reduction measure, like lower the reservoir pool, increase monitoring. It could be, hey, this thing is rapidly developing. We may need to evacuate downstream. We hope that it never gets there. We hope things are caught early enough, but there are some failure modes that are rapid, that maybe you didn't have the instrument in the right spot for. But it's scaling the response according to the risk. And that has to be adjusted per project. So every project needs to be looked at. Which are your critical instruments? What behavior would cause you some amount of concern? What would be a higher level of concern? And then what's your emergency? And what are those appropriate actions, and scale it appropriately, and train people on them. If you're involved in that, you should definitely be communicating, hey, we saw this, it was an error, it's nothing, or hey, we saw this, we're concerned, here's what we're doing. And letting people know that, hey, something's happening, and then close the loop on it. Okay, it was nothing. We went to the field and we found out, it rained, or there was something happening in the field that triggered that response. But if it is something, the sooner you elevate that and get people acknowledging it, the sooner we can intervene, because that's the whole purpose of the instrumentation, is to intervene before you have a failure, to inform of a problem ahead of time, right?
Yeah. I think it's really important what you said about when you're establishing these action level triggers, to not just consider them more, even if they're relatively low probability. Don't stop there. Go all the way. You want to think ahead of time about what happens if it gets really bad, so that you're not, if God forbid, the instrument starts to trend in that direction, you're not scrambling like, well, now what do we do?
Yeah.
So have everything from some threshold action all the way to emergency response. So we got a question from the audience that deals with the frequency of looking at instruments. So your article, you talk a little bit about the frequency of collecting data, but there's also the frequency of interpreting that data, right? And so you can imagine that each of these it's a connected workflow, but they may be delegated to different people. They may be geographically separated, and there may be some time separation. So where have you found, imagine at some points there are bottlenecks. And so have you found that the bottlenecks tend to be more on the data collection frequency side, or that there's this data that accumulates and it's the bottleneck is actually on the interpretation part of the workflow?
So it's different on different projects. I have definitely seen it where the data is not collected at the frequency that's been established. And that's usually when there's not enough resources allocated to the project. That's usually a project that is not a high risk project, high consequence project. It's the lower risk projects I've seen that on, or maybe there's not been seen a lot of movement in the project. It's been stable for years, so they're like, we can wait on that. I've seen that end of it. More often than not, though, I see it on the other side. I see it in the interpretation. And the reason for that is it's not that hard to go out and collect the data. And oftentimes we'll have the data automated. So the data's there. Someone's collected it. Someone's put it somewhere. The interpretation takes more time, right? You got to process the data. You got to plot the data. And then you got to understand what it's telling you. And a lot of times what I've seen is it'll get processed and plotted, and there'll be maybe a quick look at it. But no one sat down to really evaluate, okay, what is this data really saying? How is it informing my understanding of the project performance? That takes experience, and it takes time, and it should be documented. And in strapped resource cases, is this isn't typically a problem for a high risk project because a lot of attention's to it, a lot of resources are to it. It's the lower risk projects. That time isn't there. So there's like an expedited review or maybe a delayed review. But I think people need to look at, hey, if I'm establishing this collection frequency, let's say to be daily, but I'm only evaluating this thing quarterly or yearly, the whole idea behind, getting that information early enough to intervene is broken, right? So if you're getting this data daily and you're looking at it a year later, and this is an extreme example, whatever happened in between, whatever trending thing happened or whatever spike happened, you've missed that opportunity to understand why that happened. So let's say you have this trending behavior and you're like, wow, that doesn't really reflect what's happening with the reservoir. I don't understand it, but it's too late now to increase monitoring the tailwater, add a precipitation gauge, right? So when you're establishing the collection frequency, you should have a similar or not too far later review and interpretation frequency.
Right. So that's really important as you think about the resources, human resources and other types of resources needed to execute a program. So if you're going to dial up the frequency, then you also need to be thinking about the downstream, volume of work that needs to be done. So we got another question from the audience, and this is related to instrument data informing models. So this may be a numerical model, a slope stability model. So what kind of insights can you share about that kind of connection between instrumentation data and models, particularly when those models are used to model like extreme events that aren't likely, well, hopefully aren't present at the time that instrumentation is collecting data?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really good practice to, let's say you've done a model during design. You made some assumptions about the groundwater and made assumptions about piezometric pressures. I think over time, as you're collecting data, you should go back into that model and update that model and see, okay, if I see these trends and what's changing with the information I have, how can I predict what may happen in the future? So that starts getting to predictive modeling. It's not simple, but you can definitely use the available data to kind of understand historical performance, how things have changed with increasing loading events or these extreme events, and say, okay, this is how these piezometers responded. This is how I think my regime is, and then go back to that model and do some updates. But definitely keeping that newer information to help inform your understanding and modeling. Yeah, I definitely think that is doable. We have done it. We've done it to confirm designs. Like we made an assumption that at the end of installing this cutoff wall, we think the piezometer levels will be this at this extreme loading event. Well, after you've installed that cutoff wall, you have a new data set of, okay, this is what these data reads. And as the reservoir is rising, plug that information back into the model, recalibrate that model, and you'll find it's pretty informative. We've had some really good results of what our predictive model said and then comparing it to actual reality. And it's worked really well. And in the cases where there was a mismatch, the mismatch we found was our lack of understanding. And I'll give an example. So we modeled upstream to downstream piezometric pressures across a cutoff wall. And the downstream piezometers should have fallen really low according to the model. And in that cross section, in reality, the downstream pressures were actually pretty high. And we're like, wow, do we have a window in our cutoff wall? Did we not do good construction? Should we verify the QC and QA records? But he was a guy I know pretty well in Huntington District. He put the model in not just cross section view, but in plan view. And by putting it in plan view, you realize where the end of the cutoff wall was. And those real responses from the piezometer was due to seepage coming through the abutment towards the downstream, elevating that pressure. So the model was upstream to downstream, predicted lower levels, but in reality, it wasn't a dam safety concern. It was the wraparound seepage through the abutment influencing the response. So that was a good check on reality of the three-dimensional nature of things. So I'm going to go on a tangent now of, okay, your models are great, but there's a lot of assumptions in those models. There's a lot of generalizations in those models, and a lot of times they're 2D, and that 3D effect isn't always understood. So I think the model is a great tool, but you need to plot things in different ways, use a variety of visuals to kind of understand what is actually being said. But yeah, definitely using the existing information to update those models and help understand what you think it'll do in the future is good practice.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Particularly, as the barriers to having access to 3D modeling capability is, those barriers are coming down, and so it becomes extra important that good modeling practices are followed, and in terms of creating the model and also utilizing any results. You should always be skeptical of models. So your article talks about redundancy, and I liked how you distinguish between incorporating redundancy by having multiple instances of multiple of the same type of instrument, and as well as redundancy achieved by having a different type of instrument, one that may have a completely different measurement principle. So how do you think about designing redundancy into these monitoring systems, and is it generally easy or is it difficult to justify redundancy in kind of the overall kind of bill of materials, if you will, for this monitoring program?
Yeah, so the justification, that all depends on the risk, right? If it's a high risk project, I think it's easy to justify redundancy. If it's a low risk, low consequence project, it's going to be harder to justify that. And I would even question, well, do you really need all that redundancy? So yeah, I definitely start with, and we mentioned it before, the risk assessment, right? Do you have a potential failure mode? And each potential failure mode has different parameters that you're interested in, right? So let's take seepage and piping, for example. For seepage and piping, your first thought is, well, I want to put in piezometers. But that's just one parameter. You could also monitor surface deformation, because if something's happening, you might see something kind of on the surface. Or there might be a seepage exit somewhere, and you might want to monitor the volume and quality of that seepage. And look at that flow rate in addition to the piezometers and the deformation. So now you have 3 data points to look at. So if you want to say, hey, do I have this potential failure mode? Is it occurring? Well, I'm looking at the piezometric pressures, I'm looking at surface deformation, and I'm looking at water quantity and quality. All of them are showing that there's no signs of distress. I feel very confident in that. And when I present that and say, hey, I want to monitor these 3 things, so I can easily say, we don't have a problem. Or I want to monitor these 3 things so that if I see some pressures doing something funny, I can validate that with the seepage and say, hey, I should be seeing a maybe potentially different seepage path over here. And if not, where is that drop in pressure leading seepage? Where's that going? It'll trigger a better understanding or more questions of where to investigate to figure out what's going on. So for me, that's the first step. The next question is, well, do you put multiple instruments of the same type? And we've seen that happen where maybe we put 2 piezometers at the same elevation. And I would recommend that where it's a critical location that you want to be sure. Like this location is, we've established that if we see something here, we'll have a high confidence something's going wrong. But too often I hear the question of, well, how do you know that data is right? Do you really believe that data? What if the instruments malfunctioned? Or how do I know that it's true? Well, if you in these critical locations, if you put a second sensor, and honestly, it's cheaper to put a second sensor, in the same hole than it is to drill a whole new hole. A few $100s for that security of, okay, we've validated this. Not only is it one sensor, but both of them are telling us the same thing. There's the confidence. There's the value of, okay, I have some confidence in this value, and this is why this is my recommendation. So yeah, I do think there's 2 ways to do it. Monitoring different things, telling you about the same potential failure mode, because that's what you're targeting based on your risk assessment, and also having that confidence in that, is that data real? Because that comes up more often than not. And in my experience, the data is real, and it's usually we don't understand it. And it takes a good evaluation of, what is influencing that response? What is the driver? What is the cause? The cause is maybe, let's say, reservoir level, it's precipitation, it's temperature, it's tailwater, it's, groundwater regime. The effect is how that instrument's responding. And there's so many things that could be influencing that response. It does take some sleuthing, and this is where I get nerded out and excited of, okay, what are the different things that could be influencing this thing? It could be the operation of some gates. It could be some maintenance activity that was performed. But until you get out there and start, doing that forensic investigation to understand it, you don't know. And if you have two instruments telling you the same thing, then you have a confidence that it is real, and I got to figure out what it is. I'm not going to discount it.
Yeah. And you mentioned, with the two piezometers in the same hole. I mean, it seems like there's an argument to kind of building this redundancy in the initial build out of the network rather than having to kind of add it in later on. So that's a really good point. So as someone who deals with a lot of different instruments and and the data that they produce, if you had a wish that would result in an innovation of some type within the performance monitoring space, like what do you wish you had the capability of doing with instruments that current technology does not allow?
Okay. So I have two answers. The first one is, an extra instrument that's missing. And I've asked many people for this, like, oh, this exists. And I said, oh yeah, show it to me. And they went back and they couldn't find it. So if somebody listening in can find that this exists, please send it to me, because I haven't found it. I want an instrument that will tell me the velocity of flow inside a borehole or inside a piezometer. We've used in the past a flow meter that we turn vertical and we traverse it down the hole, back up the hole, and there's a propeller on this that spins when water hits it. You can get a sense of where your seepage zone is, and because it'll spread faster there, but you don't know what that velocity is. It's kind of hard to track that change over time. So if I know I have a zone and I think I have flow there, because I've been on projects where you hear stories of, I heard rushing water. It's just like, really? Like I want to monitor that, and I want to know when it increases and decreases. So that's the tool that I think shouldn't be too hard to make. But I haven't seen it yet. The other tool I think is a more accessible platform for folks to bring in a variety of data into one space to visualize it and connect it to modeling, right? I think we have a lot of the components there. I think we have a lot of data management systems. We have great visualizations. We have great software that's out there to do seepage analysis and slope stability analysis. But a way to tie all that together, right? That includes not just the piezometer data, but also the inclinometer data, maybe brings in the geophysical data, and brings in the project features, and then the live stream of what is the instrumentation telling you, and having that live update of the model, and then being able to run that analysis that the question was based off of, future prediction. Can we use all this to future predict these factors of safety? I think pulling all that together in one platform, again, we have pieces. We're not far from that, but a full suite that does it all, we're not quite there yet.
Right. Like a graphical, spatial dashboard of everything that you have, and that would kind of allow you, as you said, in response, when you're talking about redundancy, having some dashboard that allows you to see those things simultaneously allows you to kind of connect the dots between instruments that are measuring different things that may be telling you about some underlying phenomenon that you're interested in.
Right. So, and being able to use that to predict, okay, here's what my factor of safety is now with the current readings. Here's what I think it may be in the future, which gets kind of back to our older discussion. But again, 3-dimensional space and visualizing all those project features with it. Do I have tunnels on the site? Do I have a geology that changes? And where is the instrument sensing zone relationship to that? And differentiating those instruments in the rock versus in near a drain or up above, having that all in one model. Making it more easier, not only for you to understand it, but to use that as a tool to explain it to others as well and help predict, okay, how's this going to perform in the future?
Yeah. So you close your article talking about the value of engineering judgment. And this is something that we talk a lot about when educating students. And I do get questions from students time to time. It's like, okay, well, how do I get this engineering judgment that you say is so important? So what would be your advice to a student on how they should kind of develop their engineering judgment?
I think it starts with asking questions, right? I've worked with a lot of interns or just fresh out of school. They seem almost afraid to ask the question because they don't want to look like they don't know anything. Well, you don't know anything. Well, you know things, but you're new. And even me, I've done this for 19 years, I still have questions. And that's okay. If you don't ask those questions, you're not going to learn, right? Using those critical thinking skills and really trying to understand the problem and understand, in 3D space where something is. Going out and experiencing new projects, being involved in those committees like I talked about, stepping out of your comfort zone to write an article, to help with a manual, to give a presentation. I think all of that's going to build in your experience. There's always going to be something you don't know. There's always going to be something you don't understand. But if you're not asking those questions, if you're not meeting the people who have different experiences, you're not going to expand your knowledge base and gain that. But I think it is how we open this discussion. It is lifelong learning, and that experience just keeps building. But if you find yourself in a situation where you're not being challenged, everything's kind of easy, then you're doing it wrong. You're not going to build that experience. You need to step out of your comfort zone. And if a project is like, well, I don't know how to do that, that's a little scary. Well, that's an opportunity to learn. And that's an opportunity to gain that experience. So take those challenging projects, step in that role that you think you're not quite ready for. And then listen to folks around you. You're going to find mentors, formal and informal. I've learned the most from folks informally, who turned out to be my greatest mentors. And it wasn't until reflecting back of, wow, that person taught me so much, and that person, pushed me, and I didn't even realize it to learn more. So surrounding yourself by people who are challenging you is a good thing, who are explaining things to you and helping you in your career. That helps you to gain experience. And as you gain experience, share that with others, because I find that I learn a lot more and also stay abreast of new technology and things as I'm sharing and teaching these things. The students or the interns, they're sharing things back that I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that we can do that this way. So it works both ways. And a lot of times I think, interns or people fresh out of school, they have this other type of experience that people who've been in the working profession for 15, 20, 30 years, we don't have. And we don't know we don't have it, just like you don't know what you don't have. So I think it goes both ways. So don't be afraid to ask those questions and share what you know, because it is a two-way street. And the only way to get that experience is to communicate. And I think I'll pause there because I'm getting a little long-winded.
No, what a great, I love that. I love that answer. That it's not just about, receiving kind of sagely wisdom to develop your judgment, but it is, as you said, a two-way street. And I think that motivates each person, and there is this exchange of knowledge. So, well, this has been fantastic. This has been a great conversation, and I'd like to, if there's any last questions from the audience, if you want to get those in. But I invite everybody to check out Georgette's article in GeoStrata magazine. It's a fantastic article amongst other fantastic articles in the issue, which you should totally check out. GeoStrata is a very high quality publication, I must say. But Georgette, this has been wonderful, and I really appreciate you sharing your insights today. Audience, please go check out other things that Georgette has presented on and has written, because it's really good stuff. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me and leading the discussions. It's been really great. Thank you.
Excellent.
And this was a lot of fun. And for all of our viewers, again, if you liked what you saw, and you're here at the end, so you probably did, go click like, subscribe, get notifications. And yes, if you do those things, we let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Georgette, you're a star now. We're probably going to ask you to come back and do more stuff just because this went really well. Melissa Beauregard said you were a rock star, and she's usually right. I know she's watching today because she put something in the chat about the
Oh, she's
GeoPrediction
fantastic.
competition in March. So shout out to Melissa and shout out for her saying all these great things about you. Mike nailed it already. Yes, go read GeoStrata cover to cover. I put that poll in the chat. I know most of you people out there are reading GeoStrata every single issue, but if you're not, you really should go do it. And I will say this, Jim Withiam and I try to work together to pick the articles that we're going to use for GeoStrata Extra. It was really hard this time. There were some great ones. So Georgette, you should feel even better about your piece after hearing that information.
Thank you.
And Mike and Georgette, thanks again for doing such a great job today. I hope it was fun.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks. Happy to come back.
And for all of our viewers, especially those that ask questions, thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging in this way. We really do appreciate it. It makes these live streams a wonderful experience for everybody. Our next live stream is going to be in just 2 days. We'll be here in 48 hours with the second episode of Hour of Scour. The joke that was so good, we decided to make a whole series out of it. Host Stacy Kaleza is going to be talking all things scour and erosion, as she always likes to do. This time it's going to be with Nina Stark from the University of Florida, who, if you know anything about coastal geotechnics, is a pretty good person to talk about that topic with. So you will not want to miss that. You can register for it at our Eventbrite page and all of the other upcoming Geo-Institute live streams, and there are a ton as we get into this final month of the Summer of Live. Mike, Georgette, thanks again. And our producer today was Aurora Flieger, and we will see everybody with another Geo-Institute live stream in 2 days.